also you are representing, who's going to pay you also? I want you to get more clarification on that area.
Council, thank you for that question. You see, the issue of conflict, as you have highlighted in the facts that you have just recounted, is a very complex one. And it's not easy to decipher at times. And that is why I said earlier that the UN has an entire office dedicated to resolving conflict of interest. And what that office does, as a matter of fact, is to also outsource that responsibility to an external entity. In this case, I cannot now remember the entity that is dealing with the UN's conflict of interest issue. If I remember, I'll tell you now, because they are always at our necks, particularly at the higher levels of the UN system. But the issue is there are experts who deal with these issues because of their complexity. I am not a conflict of interest expert, but I know certain fundamentals about conflict of interest because as part of my current role, I deal with that for my staff. And it's not a straightforward matter, and I don't want to say anything about the situation you've just described which may not be entirely accurate, because the facts may not all be laid before me for me to provide an informed view. So I would kindly request that you allow me not to make a comment on this, because it's for lack of all the facts, if you like. Yes.
Fair enough. Then the other question I have is in relation to the involvement of the Minister of Finance in the whole transaction of the Commission. Because if you look at the sales of assets, well, let's go of the forfeiture. When you forfeit to the state, at least a particular ministry is responsible because it's an asset to the state. And normally the assets of the state, for the most part, are the responsibility of the Minister of Finance, because for various reasons. There were judicial sales, and there were also the interministerial that agreed to sell certain properties, and then also the commission as well. But from the records we have seen, I have seen very limited activity of the Minister of Finance. And I wanted to find out exactly what was the involvement of the Minister of Finance through all these transactions, knowing fully that the finances of the state, actually management, etc., rest in their hands. Now, when you look at the white paper, you realize that the former president, the government is almost claiming close to 25 billion. When you look at all the summaries of all the monies that they're going after, which is about almost 30% of our national debt itself, which is huge. And the sales so far also made from the three sales, which is the judicial sale, the interministerial, and also the commission. The last time we had a parliamentary question, I think it was over $1 billion. I think the last time you brought this question, it was over $1 billion. But yet still, it seems the activities of the Minister of Finance really is not that much part of all these things there. In fact, a member did ask a question to the Minister of Finance, asking a lot of questions about these sales, but he seems not to know much about it. So I want to find out exactly what was the involvement of the Minister of Finance with all these asset sales, and as well as the other process that you pursue, which has the potential to have some recoveries for the government. What is their involvement?
It's a very pertinent question. Certainly, under our laws, the Ministry of Finance is responsible for government assets. Assets that are acquired by the government for use by the government. In the case of assets recovery, normally the practice is a joint responsibility between the Ministries of Finance and Justice in the case of assets recovery, and that is very common practice everywhere. And that's why, for instance, if you take the US, it's the Department of Treasury and the Department of Justice. The World Bank also has the asset recovery process, where they have a combined departments of finance and justice, so legal officers. So it's a joint effort. The issue, of course, was debated at some point between the Ministries of Justice and Finance, and for a number of reasons, in this particular instance, the Ministry of Finance was not given a prominent role with respect to the landed properties and the properties that were given to the receiver, because of several reasons. Some of them, I don't want to sound personal, but at the time that the Janneh Commission concluded its report and submitted it to the President, and the recovery started, the Honorable Minister of Finance was a subject of the Janneh Commission proceedings, and he was the subject of an adverse finding by the Janneh Commission. And that is why even in Cabinet, during the deliberations on the white paper, he was requested to recuse himself from those discussions. When I actually wrote to the President, when we were looking at the different options in terms of how to move forward with the disposal of the assets, when I wrote to the President to propose the setting up of the ministerial committee, I had actually, looking back, in error, included the Minister of Finance in the proposal for the establishment of the ministerial committee, and of course the permanent secretary of the Minister of Finance in the technical committee that was to act as an advisory group. It was after my letter to the President to propose the establishment of the ministerial committee, including the Minister of Finance, that my attention was drawn to the fact that in order to retain the integrity of the entire process, it may be better for the Ministry of Finance not to be involved, but that the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Finance be retained in the technical committee group. And that is what happened. That's why we ended up having 4 ministries instead of 5 in the ministerial committee, because of the position of the Minister of Finance at the time. But otherwise, assets recovery processes are joint processes by Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Finance. And what we did in this case was that for the assets that were identified to be used by the government, those were then placed under the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance as the ministry that oversees government assets. But until that point, when assets are identified for that purpose, the other assets form part of the assets recovery process, and therefore the Ministry of Justice would continue to play a role in that process. Yeah.
Yes, that is fine. Now, also, you know, the Ministry of Finance also have another department that they call AMRC, which is Asset Management Recovery Corporation. I'm not too sure if they were also implicated with former president. If you can throw more light on that, because again, their job was just that, actually, recovery of assets for the government, etc., like that. So I don't know also if you have engaged them or involved them, or at what capacity have you done that?
Indeed, the AMRC, which was established as the official and statutory receivers for the Gambia Commercial and Development Bank back in 1993, was established to recover loans and assets that GCDB had giving out at the time. And so they were obviously still in existence at the time. They were part of, if you look at the legal notice, where we laid out the state-owned enterprises that were to be the primary subjects of the Janneh Commission inquiry. AMRC was expressly mentioned there together with Social Security and NAWEC, etc. And then, of course, when the Janneh Commission was conducting its proceedings, it made certain adverse findings against the AMRC in the Commission's report. The Janneh Commission explicitly found that the AMRC was complicit in the unlawful acquisition of public property by former President Janneh. And the Janneh Commission further stated that had it had more time, it would have conducted more inquiry into the activities of the AMRC. But for lack of time, it didn't do so. But then it recommended for the government to set up another body to look further into the activities of the AMRC, because, as I said, they made findings, a couple of findings in their report, that the AMRC was complicit in the unlawful acquisition of property, state property, by the former president. For those reasons, we did not suggest for the AMRC to take over this asset recovery process, simply because the AMRC, as I said, was also the subject of an adverse finding and a recommendation that additional inquiries should be made about their conduct, which I think was not unexpected. I don't recall throughout my time here when the AMRC provided a compte rendu, if you like, in French, a report of their activities. I believe the way that the government was forthcoming with the assets and the monies that were made, I don't ever recall the AMRC giving account of the amount of money or income that were generated as a result of the assets recovery exercises that they carried out, not just for GCDB, but also following the 1994 military takeover. But in any event, the decision was based on the findings of the Janneh Commission and the recommendations therein.
Thank you very much. Now, the last question I have is in relation to the activities of the Commission, even though I do understand that you may not want to venture too much into it because they were an independent body. But I want to find out, actually, were you not concerned about their activities actually selling, because of they were created to inquire, even though the Act gives them the powers, to make certain decisions. Were you not concerned when they start to sell some of the acts, knowing fully that at least they needed to present a report to the principal that so and so actually has happened? Now, the issue of the animals, we know some of the issues actually happen. Some of them are all the cannibalization of some of the assets. But were you not concerned about those activities that they are venturing into, even though legally, they may have the power to do so, but were you not concerned that maybe it may have been too early for them to venture into those particular areas because they are expected to investigate, have a report, and then present the report, just like what was done at the end of their after. Were you not concerned about those?
Like the sale of the tractors, because you did exclude, I guess, because you understood that perhaps with the livestock it was necessary. Well, with the sale of the tractors, again, now this jogs my memory a little bit. Maybe, Council, you need to hear this, since you asked whether I recall the government asking me to reach out to the Commission to ask them to defer the sale. Your question now actually reminds me that indeed I had reached out to Council Ami Bensouda to raise the possibility of deferring the sale of the tractors until the government reverts. And I recall Council Bensouda's response. And I recall this response because she used a very bizarre word at the time for tractors. She said they were being cannibalized. And that's how I recall the conversation, because of the word, the cannibalization of the tractors. It was used in a very awkward way, because cannibalization is understood to involve human beings and not machines. But anyway, she raised a concern that the tractors were being cannibalized. In other words, parts of the tractors were being stolen from where they were assembled. Parts were disappearing, etc. And if quick action is not taken, the tractors would be worthless. And so that was the pressure which prompted the commission to sell the tractor. So I was not concerned as such, because in my view they had the power to do so if they believed that there was risk of dissipation or perish of the material. So I was not concerned. In any event, I was of the view that they were an independent body. They were acting independently. And again, like I said, Honorable, honestly, at that time, I had too much on my plate. You would recall that I was perhaps the minister who most visited the National Assembly at the time. And that's just the National Assembly part. There were so many other things that were going on in this country around the Ministry of Justice that really I would set up these commissions and then move on to the next one like a production line in a factory. And those were my preoccupations, honestly.
Yes, thank you. Pardon me, Chair. That was supposed to be my last question, but then something came to mind. In relation to the former president, again, for assets landed or otherwise outside the country, was there any particular time where the ministry made attempts by various ways to try to find out if there were assets in foreign land, bank accounts, shares, etc., that perhaps the government can do something to try to was there anything like that?
Yes, indeed. And this is a very important question, because from time to time, occasionally, that's why I said those who are outside the country are too informed sometimes, because they make assumptions and they create their stories based on those assumptions. I have heard people say no efforts were done by the ministry to find out about the assets of the former president, as if this was a process where the ministry needs to announce it publicly that we are tracking the assets of the former president. The whole point of international asset tracking effort is confidentiality, is discretion. Once you announce it, the assets, will be moved. So you don't say this in public. And because we didn't say this, some people thought we did nothing, which was not true. And I'll tell you what we did. First, as I said, when the Janneh Commission submitted its report, we wrote to the Swiss government to request for the freezing of accounts of one of the companies that was operating here in close collaboration with the former president, but which had a head office in Switzerland. And the Swiss government did freeze the accounts. It had millions of dollars in that account, and that was frozen while we were negotiating with the Swiss, because it's one thing to have the cooperation of the Swiss government, and I recall I was the one who personally reached out to the Swiss ambassador in Dakar, and she put me in contact with the relevant Swiss office, and then the ministry reached out and we wrote our correspondences, and as a result of which the accounts were frozen. But because Switzerland is a country of laws as well, they can't just freeze the account and just leave it as that. We needed to now follow up to show the link that the monies that were being deposited in that account were the proceeds of a criminal enterprise, of a crime, if you like, from the Gambia. And we had the Janneh Commission report, which is what we attached as a first step to the Swiss courts. This is where I left that matter when I left office. So we had that. That was one. Two, my Solicitor General and I, together with the former High Commissioner of the Gambia to the UK, Ambassador Blaine, met with a UK law firm in London that was specialized in assets tracking. They were ready to help us trace the former president's foreign assets and accounts. They had information that was helpful to us, and we agreed with them on a no trace, no fee basis. And the idea was, if they trace the assets and located them, and the Gambia government secures those assets, then they would be paid from those assets. And the agreement at the time was about 25%. 25% because they would expend their own costs to track and find those assets. That was done with a farm in the UK, an assets tracking farm in the UK. And another effort was done. This time it was very highly confidential by myself with another assets tracking farm in Dubai. I am saying all of this now because all of this is in the past. But we again contracted. They were introduced to us here in Banjul by a Gambian, and they also had information about the former president's assets and accounts in the Middle East, and so they wanted to be engaged to track those assets. Again, the arrangement was the same: no recovery, no fee. Arrangement, about 20 to 25% again with that. So those efforts were deployed to seek the foreign accounts and assets of the former president, and I left the ministry with all those processes still in place. I don't know what has happened, whether there were any yields in the end from those processes, but these were the efforts that were deployed at the time.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll pursue that, and I think those answers will be really very helpful for us, and the committee will pursue that from where you stop, or what next actually has happened. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so very much, Mr. Tambadou. It has taken a long day, but now we have come to the end of the day. Council, is Diba around?
Yes, Honorable Chair.
Yeah, I just wanted to know whether he has anything to clarify before we...
No question.
No question,
for today.
sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Till tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, then we will close for today. We'll adjourn the meeting till tomorrow. Tomorrow morning. Tomorrow we'll start at 10 o'clock again.
10 o'clock.
Yes. We will definitely
you,
try
sir.
and start at 10.
I will be here.
At most 10:30.
I will be here.
Sure.
I will be
So
here.
we can finish tomorrow. All right, meeting adjourned till tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Friday.